I'm Barbara, the eldest of two daughters, and for as long as I can remember, I've always been the serious one, the responsible one. My sister Michelle, she's the opposite, bubbly, carefree, and effortlessly charming. Growing up, our house was always filled with noise, Michelle's laughter echoing through the halls, Mom and Dad fussing over her, and the constant soundtrack of whatever pop hit she was obsessed with that week. Me. I preferred quiet corners, my nose buried in a book or focused on my homework. Birthdays and holidays always made the differences between us painfully clear. Michelle would rip through her gifts, squealing with excitement over trendy clothes or the latest gadgets. I, on the other hand, carefully set aside any money I received. "What are you saving for this time?" Dad would ask, a hint of pride in his voice. "A laptop for studying," I'd reply. "The library computers are always busy." He'd nod, but I could see the confusion in his eyes. They never really understood why I didn't want the same things other girls my age did. Meanwhile, Michelle was a whirlwind of fashion trends and endless demands. "Mom, did you see the new iPhone? Everyone at school has one. I need it," she'd exclaim. And just like that, she'd get it. No questions, no saving. I still remember the day I finally bought my laptop. Months of scrimping and saving, hours spent researching the best model. When I brought it home, I was practically bursting with pride. "Look, I finally got it," I announced at dinner, holding it up like a trophy. Mom glanced up briefly from her plate. "That's nice, dear." Then, as if on cue, she turned to Michelle. "Oh, Michelle, tell us about your day at the mall." Just like that, my moment vanished. It wasn't that they didn't love me. I knew they did, in their own way. But Michelle was the sun in our family's solar system, and I was just a distant planet, quietly orbiting on my own path. As we got older, the gap between us widened. Michelle experimented with wild hairstyles and followed every new fashion trend. I stuck to my practical ponytail and jeans. The library became my sanctuary, a quiet refuge where I could focus on my goals without distractions. When college application season rolled around, I threw myself into it. I spent countless nights perfecting essays, researching scholarships, and prepping for entrance exams. The day I received my acceptance letter, with a full scholarship, was one of the happiest moments of my life. I ran into the kitchen waving the letter excitedly. "Mom! Dad! I got in, and it's a full scholarship." Mom glanced up from where she was helping Michelle with her eyeliner. "That's nice, dear. Michelle, hold still. I'm trying to get this perfect." Dad peeked over his newspaper and offered a distracted, "Good job, Barbara. We expected nothing less." Their lack of excitement stung, but I was used to it. I retreated to my room, clutching that letter like a lifeline. This was my ticket out, my chance to finally prove myself. Meanwhile, Michelle barely scraped through high school. When she brought home her poor report card, I thought for sure our parents would finally be disappointed. But no. "Oh, sweetie, don't worry," Mom said, stroking Michelle's hair. "College isn't for everyone. You have so many other talents." Dad nodded. "That's right, Princess. You'll figure out your path." I couldn't believe it. "Are you serious? She barely passed?" I blurted out. Mom shot me a sharp look. "Barbara, don't be mean. Your sister has other gifts." I bit my tongue and walked away. No matter what I achieved, Michelle would always be their favorite. Going off to college felt like freedom. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who appreciated hard work and ambition. I didn't have to play second fiddle to anyone. I threw myself into my studies, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. My professors noticed my dedication, and for once being a bookworm wasn't something people teased me about. It was something they admired. It felt good. I'd call home now and then to check in, but the conversations always followed the same pattern. "Barbara, that's nice," Mom would say, after I told her about a paper I aced or a research project I was part of. Then her tone would shift, brighter, more animated. "Did you hear about Michelle? She's thinking of taking beauty courses. Isn't that exciting?" Every call left me feeling deflated. It didn't matter what I achieved. Michelle's plans, no matter how half-baked, always stole the spotlight. One day, during my second year, I got a call from Michelle herself. Her voice bubbled through the phone like always. "Guess what? I'm thinking of enrolling in this super chic beauty academy," she chirped. "Mom and Dad are thrilled about it." I wanted to tell her about the internship I'd just landed with a prestigious research firm, but I knew she wouldn't care. "Sounds great," I muttered. After hanging up, I sat on my dorm bed feeling a familiar frustration bubble up. But there was also something else, a quiet resolve. I was on my own path now, and I was going to make it count. The years flew by. While Michelle bounced from one beauty course to the next without finishing any of them, I graduated with honors. I landed a job at a top company before my diploma was even dry. Moving into my own apartment was a bittersweet moment. As I unpacked my few belongings, I thought about how different my life was from Michelle's. She was still at home, pampered by our parents, while I was standing on my own, ready to take on the world. The first few months at my job were a blur. Long hours, late nights, endless meetings, but I thrived on it. I was determined to prove myself. Then about a year in, I got promoted to team leader. I was ecstatic. "Mom, Dad, I have news," I called home, unable to keep the excitement out of my voice. "I got promoted. I'm a team leader now." "Oh, Barbara, that's nice," Mom said, her tone as neutral as ever. "But guess what? Michelle met this wonderful guy. He comes from a great family, and we're all so thrilled." I clenched my jaw as she went on about Michelle's new boyfriend, my promotion completely forgotten. After I hung up, I sat there staring at my phone, the high of my achievement crashing down around me. But instead of wallowing in disappointment, I let it fuel me. If my family couldn't celebrate my success, I'd just have to achieve even more. I threw myself into my work. Days turned into nights. Weekends became extra opportunities to get ahead. My hard work paid off. One promotion led to another, and before long, I was the youngest department head in the company's history. Then, one day, I got called into Mr. Paul's office. He was the owner of the company, a man who didn't hand out praise lightly. "Barbara," he said, smiling, "your work has been outstanding. We've never had someone rise through the ranks this quickly." "Thank you, sir," I said, pride swelling in my chest. "I love what I do." "And it shows," he replied. "That's why we're offering you something special, a chance to buy one of the company apartments at a significant discount. You've earned it." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork and planning. When I finally got the keys to my new place, I felt like I was floating. To celebrate, I decided to host a housewarming party. It wasn't fancy. I didn't have much furniture yet, so I picked up some inexpensive plastic tables and chairs. Even the disposable tableware matched the decor. It was my home, and I was proud of it. My colleagues arrived first, bringing thoughtful gifts and warm congratulations. Then my family showed up. Mom, Dad, and Michelle came in like a whirlwind, as always. Michelle's eyes darted around the room, taking in the modest furnishings. I caught the smirk she tried to hide. "Barbara," she said, holding a champagne flute, her tone sweet but her gaze critical. "So glad you could finally invite us. I hope you're taking notes. This is how you really throw a party." Her words stung. I opened my mouth to respond, but she had already turned away, flitting from guest to guest like a butterfly, soaking up all the attention. As the evening went on, I noticed a disturbing pattern. Every time one of my colleagues congratulated me or brought up my accomplishments, my parents would immediately change the subject to Michelle. "Oh, that reminds me," Mom said, cutting off one of my coworkers mid-sentence. "Did Barbara tell you about Michelle's latest modeling gig? She's just so photogenic." Dad chimed in with a proud smile. Our Michelle was born for the spotlight, such natural talent. I saw the confused, slightly uncomfortable looks on my colleagues' faces. The focus had completely shifted from my achievements to Michelle's looks. Once again, I wanted to disappear into the floor. Michelle, on the other hand, soaked up the attention like a sponge. "Oh, Mom, stop it," she giggled, clearly enjoying every second. Finally, mercifully, my family left. The moment the door closed, my coworker Laura turned to me. wide-eyed. "Barbara, what the hell was that?" she asked, her voice low and concerned. I forced a smile, brushing it off. "Oh, you know, that's just how they are." David, another colleague, shook his head. "No, Barbara, that's not normal. Are you okay? Do you need help?" A lump formed in my throat. Their concern was touching, but also embarrassing. "Guys, really, it's fine. I'm used to it," I said, forcing another smile. "Who wants another drink?" As I busied myself in the kitchen, I could hear them whispering, their worry obvious. I blinked back tears, refusing to let them see how much my family's behavior had hurt me. After that disastrous housewarming, I buried myself in work again, determined to move forward. The months flew by, and slowly, I turned my apartment into a home I could truly be proud of. Every piece of furniture, every splash of color on the walls, it all reminded me of my hard work and independence. One sunny Monday, I decided to treat myself to something I'd been saving for, a car. It wasn't flashy, just a reliable sedan to get me where I needed to go. But as I drove it home, a wave of pride washed over me. This car was mine, bought with my own money, a symbol of everything I'd accomplished. I hadn't planned to tell my family about the car, but word spread fast. That evening, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Michelle. With a sigh, I answered. "Hey, Michelle!" Her cheerful voice came through the speaker. "Rach, I heard you bought a car." "That's nice," she said, her tone making it clear she didn't really mean it. There was a pause, then she added, "You know, you're really doing things the hard way." I frowned. "What do you mean by that?" "Well," she said, as if explaining something obvious, "the main job of a woman is to marry properly. Find a man who'll take care of you, give you everything you need. Why work yourself to death when you could have it all handed to you?" Her words made my stomach twist. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Michelle, that's not how I see things," I said firmly. "I want to earn what I have. I'm proud of what I've accomplished." She let out a light, tinkling laugh. "Oh, Rach, always the difficult one. Well, you'll see. I'll show you how it's done." Before I could respond, she hung up. I stared at the phone, a mix of anger and disbelief swirling inside me. How could we see life so differently? A few months later, I got my answer. Michelle called again, her voice practically buzzing with excitement. "Barbara, guess what? I'm getting married." I blinked, surprised. "Married? To who?" "His name is Nicholas," she gushed. "He's loaded. His family is paying for everything. The wedding's going to be stunning." As she went on about dresses, flowers, and guest lists, I felt this growing emptiness inside me. This was it. This was what Michelle had been working toward all her life. The wedding day came faster than I expected. I stood in a grand hall, surrounded by glittering guests, feeling completely out of place. Michelle looked radiant in her designer gown, and our parents couldn't stop beaming with pride. I sipped my champagne, trying to swallow the bitterness building inside me. Had Mom and Dad ever looked at me like that? Had they ever been that proud of anything I'd achieved? As the night went on, I felt more and more like a stranger. Michelle thrived in the spotlight, charming the guests, soaking up every bit of attention. Our parents introduced themselves to everyone, proudly announcing, "We're the parents of the bride." On my way home, driving my modest car back to my modest apartment, I couldn't help but wonder, had I made the wrong choices? Was Michelle right? Had I chosen the harder path for nothing? But then I thought about my job, my promotions, my apartment, everything I'd built with my own two hands. No, I shook my head, determination hardening inside me. My path might be harder, but it was mine. And that made all the difference. After Michelle's wedding, life settled into a routine. Work kept me busy, and I was thriving. But my mom's calls became a regular and unwelcome interruption. Every conversation followed the same pattern. "Barbara, darling," Mom would start, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You won't believe what Michelle's been up to." I'd brace myself as she launched into another story about Michelle's fabulous life. "She's been invited to the most exclusive events. Can you believe it? Our Michelle, rubbing elbows with high society. One day, after an especially exhausting call, I couldn't hold back anymore. That's great for Michelle, I said, frustration leaking into my voice. But don't you want to know what's going on in my life? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Mom's voice came through, patronizing and dismissive. Oh, honey, of course we care, but you really should learn from your sister. Be more glamorous. Why work so hard for so little when you could have it all? I clenched my jaw, gripping the phone tightly. Mom, I like working hard. I'm proud of what I've accomplished. She sighed, clearly bored of the conversation. Well, if that makes you happy, dear, but you could have so much more. A few weeks later, I received an invitation. Michelle and Nicholas were throwing a housewarming party for their new luxury apartment. A gift from his parents, naturally. The night of the party, I stood outside their building, feeling small. I smoothed down my simple dress, took a deep breath, and walked in. The apartment was breathtaking. Every surface sparkled. Every piece of furniture looked like it cost more than I made in a year. My parents were already there, marveling at everything. I tried to stay in the background, but Michelle spotted me almost immediately. "Barbara," she called out, gliding over with a champagne flute in hand. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe, critical and calculating. "So glad you could make it," she said, her tone sugary sweet. "I hope you're taking notes. This is how a housewarming should be done. None of that plastic furniture and disposable dishes nonsense like at your place." Her words hit like a slap. "Michelle, that's—" But she was already gone, flitting off to dazzle her guests. I stood there, cheeks burning, as her words echoed in my head. In the weeks that followed, Michelle seemed determined to flaunt her lifestyle at every turn. She bought the most expensive things, clothes, jewelry, you name it. Then came the car. One evening after work, a sleek sports car pulled up beside me. The window rolled down, and there was Michelle, her face smug and self-satisfied. "Like it," she purred. "Just a little gift from Nicholas. Thought I'd take it for a spin." I glanced at my plain but dependable sedan. "It's very nice," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. She followed my gaze and smirked. "Oh, Barbara," she said with a laugh. "Always settling for less. You'll always be working for others while I live the good life." Her words stung, but I didn't let her see it. 3 years passed in a blur of spreadsheets, meetings, and promotions. I climbed the corporate ladder, my hard work paying off. Meanwhile, Michelle seemed perfectly content, hopping from one shopping spree to another. Our lives couldn't have been more different. I thought I had made peace with that. But then, on an ordinary Saturday, everything changed. My phone rang, and I answered without thinking. "Barbara," Mom said, her voice shaky. It's Michelle. She's back home. Nicholas left her. He said she's too shallow, too focused on spending his money. He called her stupid. Can you believe it? And she signed a prenup. She has nothing." A wave of emotions hit me. Shock, concern, and, if I'm being honest, a tiny flicker of vindication. I quickly pushed that feeling aside, ashamed of myself. "I'm coming over," I said, already grabbing my keys. When I pulled into my parents' driveway, I could hear Michelle screaming from inside the house. Her voice was raw, filled with a mix of rage and despair. The moment I stepped through the door, I felt like I had walked into a war zone. Michelle was in the living room, mascara streaked down her face, her designer clothes wrinkled and disheveled. She was throwing anything within reach: pillows, picture frames, even Dad's old magazines. "He can't do this to me," she shrieked. "I'm Michelle. I'm beautiful. I'm perfect." Mom hovered near her, wringing her hands. "Sweetie, please calm down," she begged. "We'll figure this out." Dad stood by the window, looking uncomfortable, but nodding along. "Of course, Princess. Don't you worry. We'll fix this." I stood there, frozen, taking in the scene. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be how life worked. Michelle had spent years living a life of luxury without lifting a finger, and now that it had all crumbled, our parents were still bending over backward to make her feel better. The days that followed were pure chaos. Michelle's tantrums didn't stop. One minute she'd be sobbing uncontrollably. The next, she'd be screaming about how unfair it all was. She demanded expensive gifts to cheer herself up. Spa days, designer clothes, fancy dinners, and our parents? They gave her everything she asked for without hesitation. One evening, after a particularly loud meltdown, I couldn't hold back anymore. "Maybe," I said carefully, "Michelle should consider getting a job." The room went silent. Mom and Dad stared at me like I had just suggested something outrageous. Michelle's eyes widened in disbelief before twisting into a look of pure anger. "A job?" she spat. "You want me to lower myself to that? To your level? Working every day like some peasant?" She burst into tears, running upstairs and slamming her door so hard the house shook. Before I could even process what had happened, Mom turned to me, her face furious. "How dare you?" she hissed. "Your sister is going through a terrible time and you suggest something like that." Dad shook his head, disappointment clear on his face. "Get out," he said, his voice cold. "Get out of this house right now." Mom pointed toward the door. "Out, and don't come back until you can be supportive of your sister." I stood there in disbelief. After everything I had done, everything I had accomplished, they were kicking me out. Without another word, I grabbed my purse and left. When I got back to my apartment, I sank onto my couch, staring at the ceiling. I felt a strange mix of emotions: sadness at being rejected by my own family, anger at their complete blindness to Michelle's faults, and oddly enough, a sense of relief. For the first time, I saw how toxic it had all been. I had spent my entire life trying to prove myself to people who would never truly see me. A few days later, life threw me a curveball. I got a call from my company's HR department. "Barbara," the voice on the other end said, "you've won the company contest." "Contest?" I asked, confused. "Yes, the 5-month, all-expenses-paid cruise around the world. You're one of the winners." I blinked in shock. I had completely forgotten about entering the contest months ago. As the details sunk in, a mix of excitement and disbelief filled me. A cruise around the world. It felt like the universe was throwing me a lifeline. In a moment of hope, or maybe foolishness, I decided to call my parents. "Mom, Dad," I said when they picked up, "I have some great news. I won a cruise around the world." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then Mom's cold voice cut through. "Barbara, how can you be so selfish?" I blinked, caught off guard. "Selfish? What are you talking about?" "Your sister is going through a terrible time," she snapped. "And here you are bragging about vacations." "I'm not bragging," I said quietly. "I just thought you'd be happy for me." Mom let out a harsh laugh. "If you had any decency, you'd give that ticket to Michelle. She needs a change of scenery. You can stay home and work, like you always do." Something inside me snapped. "No," I said, my voice firm. "I earned this trip. I'm not giving it up because Michelle made bad choices. I'm going." The next few weeks were a blur of preparations. I packed my bags, sorted out everything at work, and made sure my apartment was secure. And on the day of departure, I did something I had never done before. I turned off my phone. For the first time in years, I felt free. The cruise was everything I had dreamed of. I watched stunning sunsets in Malta, explored ancient ruins in Greece, and wandered through bustling markets in Singapore. For 4 incredible months, I was just me. Not the responsible older sister, not the family disappointment. Just Barbara. I rediscovered parts of myself I had forgotten. I laughed more. I made friends with people from all over the world. I let myself breathe, but all good things must come to an end. When the ship docked back home, reality hit. I turned my phone back on, expecting a flood of messages, but there were only a few missed calls from my parents. Feeling lighter than I had in years, I headed home. As I approached my apartment, I heard noises inside. My heart pounded. Had someone broken in? I cautiously opened the door and froze. There, sprawled on my couch, surrounded by shopping bags and empty takeout containers, was Michelle. She looked up lazily when she saw me. "Oh, you're back. Finally." I stared at her, completely stunned. "Michelle, what the hell are you doing here?" She rolled her eyes, as if I was being dramatic. "Don't be so uptight, Barbara. I used the spare key you left with Mom and Dad. I needed a change of scenery. Everything at home reminded me of, you know." I stood there, speechless. This was too much. "I'm going to the store," I muttered, grabbing my car keys and heading outside. But when I got to the parking lot, my car was gone. Panic set in as I frantically called my parents. Mom answered, her voice overly cheerful. "Barbara, dear, how was your trip?" "Where's my car?" I cut straight to the point. There was a pause. Then Dad's voice came on the line. "We sold it." I nearly dropped my phone. "You what?" "Michelle needed cheering up," Mom said casually, as if it was no big deal. "We used the money to take her shopping and to the spa." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. That was my car. "You had no right." Dad's voice turned stern. "Now, Barbara, we're family. What's yours is ours. Don't be selfish." Something inside me snapped, years of frustration and anger boiling over. "Selfish?" I yelled. "You stole my car. You invaded my home. And I'm the selfish one?" Their response was immediate and harsh. They called me heartless, ungrateful, a disappointment. The words stung, but for the first time, they didn't break me. I hung up the phone, marched back into my apartment, and faced Michelle, who was still lounging on my couch. "Get out," I said quietly, but firmly. She looked up, shocked. "What?" "Get out. Now." Michelle stared at me, stunned. "You're kicking me out?" she asked, as if the very idea was unthinkable. I nodded, keeping my voice steady. "Yes?" "Get out. Now." She blinked, clearly trying to process what was happening. Then, like clockwork, her expression shifted. Eyes wide, lower lip trembling, her signature pity act. "But I have nowhere to go," she whispered, her voice soft and broken. I didn't budge. "Go back to Mom and Dad's." Her face twisted into a scowl. "They don't want me there anymore. They said I need to figure things out." I crossed my arms. Not my problem. For once, Michelle seemed genuinely at a loss for words. She stood up slowly, grabbing her designer purse and slinging it over her shoulder. "You've changed," she said, her tone dripping with bitterness. "No," I replied calmly. "I finally stopped letting you, and everyone else, walk all over me." She scoffed, tossing her hair over her shoulder as she walked to the door. "Fine, but don't expect me to come crawling back when you realize you're all alone." I didn't bother responding. The door slammed behind her, and for the first time in my life, my apartment felt peaceful. I sank onto my couch, letting out a long breath. The weight I'd been carrying for years, of being the responsible one, the overlooked one, the backup plan, felt lighter. This time, I wasn't going to let it creep back. The next day, I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a lawyer. I wasn't just going to let them get away with stealing my car and selling it like it was theirs. Sitting across from my lawyer, I laid everything out. The emotional manipulation, the financial exploitation, the years of being treated as if my hard work didn't matter. He listened carefully, nodding as he took notes. "You've got a strong case," he said. "It won't be easy, but if you're willing to fight, we can win." "I'm ready," I said, my voice steady, and I was ready. The legal process was exhausting. I had to recount every hurtful detail, lay out years of mistreatment in front of strangers, but I didn't back down. Meanwhile, my parents were furious. "You're suing us?" Mom shrieked over the phone. "Your own family?" "You're not acting like family," I said firmly. "Family doesn't steal from each other. They tried everything to make me drop the case. They guilted me, called me ungrateful, even threatened to cut me out of their will. I didn't care. I'd spent my whole life chasing their approval, only to realize it wasn't worth the cost." The day of the court hearing was nerve-wracking. My parents sat on the other side of the courtroom, their expressions cold and distant. Michelle wasn't there, of course. I took a deep breath as the judge asked me to speak. "This isn't about money," I began. "It's about respect. It's about boundaries. For years, I've worked hard to build a life for myself, only to have my family dismiss my achievements and take what wasn't theirs to take. I've been called selfish for wanting to keep what I earned, but I'm not selfish. I'm just tired of being used." When I sat down, my hands were shaking, but I felt a strange sense of peace. I had said my truth, and there was no turning back now. The judge ruled in my favor. My parents were ordered to repay me the value of my car. They had to sell their house to do it. It wasn't a victory that brought joy, but it brought closure. They moved into a small apartment, telling anyone who would listen that I was the villain who had ruined their lives. Their words used to cut deep. Now, they barely grazed me. Life moved on. I bought a new car, a sleek silver sedan, bought with my own money. I poured myself into work, climbing the corporate ladder even further. Promotions came quickly, but this time, I made sure to balance my work with things that brought me joy. I traveled to places I'd only dreamed of. I picked up hobbies, painting, hiking, even yoga. And most importantly, I surrounded myself with people who valued me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. People like Laura and David from work, who had seen through my family's behavior from the beginning. One evening, as we sat on my apartment balcony, sipping wine and watching the sunset, Laura turned to me with a smile. "Barbara, you've come a long way." I nodded, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in years. "I have, and I'm not going back." Every now and then, I'd get a text from Michelle. Usually something along the lines of, "Hey sis, let's catch up soon. Miss you." I never responded, not because I hated her, but because I finally understood that some relationships are better left in the past. Now, as I sit in my office, looking out over the city skyline, I can't help but smile. The path I chose wasn't easy. It was filled with twists, heartbreaks, and moments of doubt. But it was mine, and I wouldn't change a thing. It's funny how life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. Months after the court case ended, I found myself standing in front of a mirror in my apartment. I barely recognized the person staring back at me. Gone was the quiet, overlooked Barbara, who had spent years trying to prove herself to people who didn't care. In her place stood someone stronger, more confident, someone who had finally learned to set boundaries. I wasn't the same person I used to be, and that was a good thing. One day, I got an unexpected call. "Barbara, it's Dad." His voice sounded older, more tired than I remembered. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. There was a long pause. "Your mother isn't doing well. She misses you. We both do." I clenched the phone tighter, a swirl of emotions rushing through me, anger, sadness, disbelief. For a moment, I considered hanging up, but then I took a deep breath. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully. "But missing me now doesn't change the way you treated me for years." "We made mistakes," Dad admitted quietly, "but we're still family." Family. That word used to mean everything to me. But now, it carried a different weight. "I've built a life without you," I said firmly. "And I'm happy. I'm not coming back to the way things were." Another pause. "We're not asking you to. Just think about it." I ended the call without making any promises. Later that night, I sat on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. I thought about Michelle, about my parents, about everything that had happened. There was still a part of me that wanted to forgive them, to reconnect. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean inviting toxic people back into your life. I had worked too hard to let anyone, family or not, pull me back into that old cycle. Weeks passed, and life kept moving forward. One evening, I met up with Laura and David for dinner. We laughed over drinks, talking about work, travel plans, and life in general. At one point, David leaned in, a curious expression on his face. "So, Barbara, any plans to reconnect with your family?" I took a sip of my wine, thinking carefully before answering. I don't know, I admitted. Maybe one day, but if I do, it'll be on my terms, not theirs. Laura nodded approvingly. Good, you deserve peace. And for the first time in a long time, I truly felt that peace. A few months later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Michelle. The envelope was thick, filled with pages of handwritten words. I hesitated before opening it, unsure if I was ready to hear what she had to say. But curiosity won out. Barbara, it began, I know I've hurt you. I know I've taken things for granted my whole life, but I'm trying to change. For the first time, I'm standing on my own 2 feet. It's not easy. Honestly, it's terrifying. But I'm learning what it means to earn something. I'm not writing this to ask for forgiveness. I'm writing to say I understand now, and I'm sorry. I sat back, the letter resting on my lap. I wasn't sure how to feel. Part of me wanted to believe her, to let her back into my life. But another part of me, the part that had fought so hard to build my own path, was hesitant. Forgiveness would take time. Trust, even more so. But at least she was trying. Years later, I look back on that time in my life with a mixture of sadness and pride. Sadness for the relationships that were lost, but pride in the person I became. I built a life on my own terms. I earned everything I have through hard work, determination, and resilience. And while the road I chose wasn't easy, it was mine. I still think about my family from time to time. Michelle eventually did get her life together. She runs a small beauty salon now. Nothing flashy, but she built it herself. We talk occasionally. The conversations are light, polite. We'll never be as close as we once were, but that's okay. Mom and Dad? They're still living in that small apartment. I heard they've mellowed out a bit, but I've kept my distance. Some wounds take longer to heal than others. As I sit in my office looking out over the city skyline, I can't help but smile. The journey hasn't been easy, but it's been worth it. I'm not the person my family tried to shape me into. I'm me, and I wouldn't change a thing. Story 2. My name is Victoria, and I now work at an office. Reaching this stage hasn't been simple because I've had a lot of difficulties. The majority of these difficulties resulted from domestic issues and the complex dynamics inside our family. Since I was a little child, my connection with my mother has been difficult. Her severe demeanor was the primary cause of our frequent arguments. In addition, I resemble my father Daniel, which further strained our relationship. Neither was my father violent or disloyal. He was indeed a very kind and honest individual. I frequently questioned why he had first married my mother. Since my dad had a reliable office job and he didn't make much money, my mom didn't like him. He had always envisioned himself as a cartoonist. My mother couldn't bear the dream. My father was always there for me, so even though we weren't wealthy, I didn't have many issues growing up. He constantly gave me encouragement and was always polite. He frequently expressed his support for me and my challenging relationship with my mother. I will fulfill our aspirations, regardless of what your mother says. Even though we didn't have much, I cherished my father. While I was growing up, my mom and I were able to get along despite the conflict. But when I entered college, everything went apart. As their relationship deteriorated, my mother finally filed for divorce from my father. Part of the reason for the divorce was that my mom used to go to a nightclub to vent her frustrations with my dad, where she met a bartender. My stepfather is this bartender who was 15 years her junior. For convenience, I refer to him as my stepfather, yet he is not at all like a biological father. He went out of his way to flaunt his strong relationship with my mother in front of me, and always addressed me informally with, "Hey, you." It was unthinkable. I remained to live with my mother and stepfather after graduating from college, since I was unable to find employment straight immediately. Then, an unforeseen event occurred. My mother became pregnant. My problematic stepfather was, of course, the baby's father. Things got much more complex at that point. My sister is 25 years my junior. She was so adorable that she didn't seem to resemble either my mother or my stepfather. Her name was Sydney. She didn't appear to be from them at all, which may not be a pleasant thing to say. My mother had a mediocre appearance, and my stepfather wasn't very attractive. I'm neither gorgeous nor ugly, But my mother immediately began comparing me to Sydney because I resemble my father, whom she hates. Sydney will be more attractive than her sister when she grows up. My mother claimed that she was very preoccupied with Sydney because she was born when she was 47. Meanwhile, her distaste for me simply intensified. "Go change Sydney's diapers, Victoria. You're the bigger sister," she would say. My mom began bossing me around constantly when she lost her job and spent her days watching Korean dramas. My life turned into a misery. Due to his exceptional intelligence, Sydney was accepted into a prestigious private kindergarten. I had a job by then, but without a partner to help me out like my mom did, I didn't make much money. I was forced to continue living at home. I lived like a stranger in my own home and hardly spoke to my family. Then, 9 years ago, at the age of 31, a significant incident occurred. I will always remember that day. Our trip to the amusement park seemed more like a family excursion than anything else. They were busy complimenting Sydney as my affluent stepfather drove us there in his Porsche. "Sydney, on the admission exam for an esteemed elementary school, you performed really well. Well done for entering," said my stepfather. "It still amazes me that she is my daughter. She'll grow up to be a fantastic leader and look out for us." With confidence, Sydney answered, "Indeed, Mom and Dad, I'll do my hardest to make you both proud." Sydney was obviously very intelligent and fulfilled all of their expectations. Considering who her parents were, her intelligence was unexpected. "Sydney, I'm excited to watch what you accomplish." "In contrast to your sister," my stepfather said. Sydney smirked and stated, "I won't be like Victoria." My mom and stepfather were laughing all the way in the car. I just sat still. At the theme park, Sydney Sharp's remarks brought up a lot of memories of my mother. There was no improvement throughout the day. Sydney, my mom, and my stepfather rode the roller coaster first, leaving me to ride by myself. They taunted me as I waited anxiously. My stepfather said, "It's not like you're going to fall. But you've already been dragged down by life, haven't you?" Later at the haunted home, Sydney commented, "How pitiful to have a sister like you." They both took the same action. They all moved on, leaving me to navigate it by myself. They were waiting for me at the exit, laughing as if it were the most hilarious thing ever. When I eventually emerged, shivering, Sydney made fun of me once again when I was terrified in the spooky home. "Ghosts don't exist at all. But you do look like one, really?" She gave a smirk. "Having a sister such as yourself is extremely embarrassing. I wanted to break off contact with them because of their persistent taunting. However, the vehicle journey home was the last straw." "I have to go to the bathroom," I murmured uneasily. "The trip home is just 40 minutes away. Simply hold it," my stepfather answered. "You should just pull over and let her out in the bushes," my mother advised, giggling. "You? Having a sibling who acts in such a manner makes me feel so ashamed," Sydney added his voice. My annoyance reached a boiling pitch. My stepfather abruptly applied the brakes. "What's the matter?" my mother inquired. He looked at the plush animal he had mistook for a living thing and said, "Sorry, I thought I saw an animal and didn't want to hit it." However, I briefly lost control due to the abrupt stop, and some information came out. The automobile was filled with the odor. "At your age, what are you doing?" My stepfather lost his temper. "My Porsche has been soiled by you." "Horrible," Sydney added his voice. "Victoria urinated on herself." How humiliating. Despite feeling ashamed, I remained silent because I was prepared to own up to my error. Then I was totally devastated by what my stepfather said. "My only daughter is Sydney. I've never considered you Sydney's sister, much less a stepdaughter. To be honest," he remarked icily, "you're more like her aunt or something. This odor is intolerable. Your entire being is intolerable." "I don't want to see that face of yours anymore," my mother continued. "I see too much of your father in you." Sydney chuckled. "Excellent. I'm an only child from now on. That brings me joy." It was more than I could handle. "Do you all truly believe this? All right, I'm going out," I shouted, and that was it. I had lost my patience. I gathered my belongings and departed from the opulent apartment where I had been residing. I took a little run-down apartment. At least I was no longer with that poisonous family, even though it wasn't much. The new flat was dilapidated and dilapidated. In hindsight, I ought to have saved more cash before departing. Thus, I may have relocated to a better location. I had no option but to spend my days there feeling lonely and depressed. Suddenly, one day, I got a letter from someone I hadn't spoken to in a long time. In the letter, my dad expressed regret for the breakup and stated that he was doing well despite the difficulties in his life. Dad. As I read his words, I muttered. I wasn't the only one having trouble, was I? The only good person in the entire family was you. I'd want to see you. I pondered. Was he the one who looked after me all the time? Indeed, he was that person, my father. I have a fiancé called Jake, in case I haven't mentioned it previously. We currently share a modest flat and met at a networking event. Jake pursues his own goals while holding down a solid employment. Furthermore, he has never made fun of me for my challenging history. Rather, he has been my strongest ally. Despite the fact that our dwelling is basic, Jake was happy to move in and never voiced any complaints. How about you visit your biological fathers? Jake recommended one night. The envelope has an address on it. He hasn't shown a desire to see me, but I still want to. I should probably hold off until he gets in touch. Really? That seems like a lost chance, Jake said. I have the same sentiments. I acknowledge that he may now have a new family. I've made the decision to hold off until he's prepared to meet. What about this? I said. Jake said. It's not necessary for you to meet him in person. Perhaps even seeing him from a distance will suffice. It's a smart concept. With a bit more optimism, I said. It's been 16 years since I last saw him. If he's my dad, I'll recognize him even though he's probably aged a lot. Then, he could be astonished by how much I've changed. Since then, you've developed significantly. Jake said that this may be the ideal moment. I made the decision to see how my dad was doing that weekend. I had no intention of knocking on his door. Rather, I would observe from a neighboring eatery. Google Maps is to thank. I discovered that his flat was directly across from a diner. Technology is a great aid. Nowadays, upon my arrival, I saw his structure. It resembled my flat quite a little, simple and ancient. My dad had always wanted to be a cartoonist, but it didn't seem like he had succeeded. It's not simple to become a cartoon artist, and I was unable to suppress my sadness. Why does someone like Sydney get it all while my dad, who is gentle and diligent, struggles? Is that him, hey? Jake pointed out the window and inquired. He resembles the picture you showed me. I looked around. Indeed, he is that. It has been a very long time, but my heart fell as I watched. My father didn't appear to be doing well. He had untidy hair. He seemed worn out and exhausted, and his clothing were crumpled. He drew ceaselessly while sitting by the window. However, he exuded a sense of weight, as though he were bearing years' worth of disappointment. Oh, Jake remarked quietly. He looks so depressed. Seeing him like way is difficult. I nodded while attempting to control my feelings. It's difficult to watch. Although he didn't appear successful to me, he appeared stuck, sketching and dealing with setback after setback. He was still my father, the one who had supported me through thick and thin, but my heart hurt even more when I saw him like way. I can relate to my dad's feelings since I also have dreams. I recall him as someone who always shone brilliantly, despite not having a lot of money or a nice family life. He's obviously gone through a lot, though. Drinks are half off today. As she came closer, the waitress spoke. I said, as I snapped out of my reverie, "Oh, sorry." I was too shaken to see my dad like that. I made the decision to depart the diner without placing an order. I wouldn't have come to see how he was doing if I had known it would feel this way. Only if he was doing well did I think I wanted to see him. How about sending him a short letter? On our way home, Jake had a suggestion. Watch his reaction. I'm not sure, I said. His initial letter was brief and based on his appearance. It appears like he has little going on. He most likely has no new family either. All he seems to be is lonely. Dad, poor you. As we returned to the flat, I was overcome with grief. Even more shocking than meeting my dad was what I discovered when I opened the mailbox. I held up a letter and said, "There's a letter here. From whom is it?" Jake inquired. "Mom sent it." "What?" Jake's eyes became wide at the mother who ruined your life. "Since you moved out, isn't this the first time she's contacted you?" "Yes," I said, continuing to gaze at the envelope. "I've been gone for 9 years. Why would she want to get in touch with me right now?" "What is it saying?" Jake inquired. I was stunned by the contents of the letter when I opened it. "She wants to come see me." Finally, I said, "What?" Jake appeared to be as perplexed as I was. "Why now? What makes her desire to visit your home?" "I don't know," I answered. "There's no logic behind it. Perhaps she feels bad about how she handled me." Jake gave a shrug. "It is feasible. Perhaps she regrets what she did." "Not in my opinion," I spoke aggressively. "Do you recall how she tossed me out in the car? It is difficult for someone like her to change. There must be a reason, though," Jake said introspectively. "What happens if she is ill or has limited time?" The idea made me stop. It's unfortunate if that's the case. I acknowledge it. Maybe I should feel sorry for her if she's ill, despite everything. However, how did she discover my address at all? Jake scowled. "I take it you didn't give it to her, or to Sydney or your stepfather." "Obviously not." "But somehow she knows where I live," I replied. "It's eerie. Was it possible that she had hired someone to locate me?" "Perhaps it's easier than that," I said. Jake said, "Perhaps a family registry was employed. Parents can acquire that type of information." "It's accurate," I said, uncomfortable. "That's absolutely something she could accomplish." "Does she really want to come here then?" Jake inquired. "Yes," I said. "Next week," she says. "She would want to come." "That's very soon," Jake remarked. "It sounds urgent. She's always been unpredictable, but there must be a precise cause this time." "She could be ill," silently, I said. "Or maybe something serious has happened. It's difficult to accept that she's suddenly changed, even if she's my mother." It was difficult to say no, but I didn't want to meet my mother, so I grudgingly consented. "Okay, I'll go see her." I'm not thrilled about it, but I told Jake, "Are you going to remain with me? I must present you." "Of course," Jake answered. "I've been anticipating the opportunity to meet her. When you're prepared." The day finally arrived. I would see my mother for the first time in 9 years. The previous evening, I couldn't sleep because I was so anxious. I kept thinking about what may happen. She will undoubtedly appear wearing gaudy attire, just as she used to. She would remark something like, "Oh, so this is the simple little place you're living in," after I informed Jake. Jake said, "That doesn't sound like what a mother would say." "Have you never met her before?" I said, "Her personality is just like that." To be honest, all I wanted was for the visit to end soon. I secretly didn't want her to go. It was a really complex emotion. The doorbell then rang. As I made my way to the door, my heart was pounding. After a little pause, I peered through the crowd. I was astonished by what I saw. "Mom? Please open the door," I muttered. Jake spoke softly. The lady standing outside wasn't the colorful, self-assured mother I recalled, even if she had come all this way. She wore basic, unadorned clothing and was skinny, almost fragile. She did not resemble the person she used to be. "How did she end up?" I asked out loud. "Is she really that sick?" She gave me a tearful expression as I opened the door. "Victoria, it's been a long time. I was hoping to see you. What's happening on, Mom?" Still in shock, I questioned. "You've shed a lot of pounds. What about your attire? Are you ill?" I felt overpowered. However, what followed left me utterly stunned. My mother apologized and lowered her head. "I was mistaken, Victoria." I said, she said, "I want to express my regret for all of the things I have done to you in the past. Please pardon me." "What?" "Confused," I said. "Why are you out here apologizing? Raise your head and enter." I opened the door for her. I'm still uneasy and uncomfortable. I introduced Jake to her after we were seated. After a little period of courteous small conversation, she began to discuss her motivation for coming. She said, "I've been having a lot of issues with your stepfather. You two always appeared so close, so I was astonished by what I said. That was unexpected. It was difficult to accept that they had been together all along, causing me to live a wretched existence now. She appeared to be broken, and I was unsure of what had changed. "What transpired between you two?" I inquired. I'm still processing this unexpected development. I was unable to even think clearly. "Just tell me what happened, Mom." I told them to try to keep things simple. Go slowly. There's no hurry. "Just talk calmly," Jake continued. My mother started to explain. As it happens, my stepfather was arrested after being embroiled in a swindle. Although I was aware of his troubled nature, I never imagined him taking such an action. "What is going on with him now?" I inquired. "He has been released on bond," my mother answered. I remarked, "That must have been really difficult for you." She gave a nod. "He used to approach me at nightclubs when we first met, offering me surefire wagers on stocks and gambling. He wasn't a very affable bartender, but I always puzzled how he had so much money. It all makes sense now." I became aware of my mom's stress levels after hearing this. She didn't resemble the person she used to be. It wasn't a serious disease, at least. That was a tiny bit of relief. "This is unbelievable," I remarked. He struck me as odd, but not this much. I didn't realize how horrible it was. She let out a sigh. "I hurt you so badly by putting your confidence in someone like him." "Well," I said, "that's all behind us now." Even yet, it was odd to console her after everything. Her words had already overpowered me. However, there was still more to come. "How is Sydney doing?" I inquired. "Her father was arrested for fraud, and she is his daughter." "Correct. She attended a prominent school. Has hers been impacted by this?" "Indeed. According to my mother, she had to leave school because of her father's arrest. She is currently enrolled in a public school among other students." "Just regular kids," I said again. I couldn't help but feel sorry for Sydney, even though she was the source of all my problems. Because of her father's transgressions, she lost all she had fought so hard to get admission to that institution. "I have another item to tell you about Sydney," my mother said. "Has she not?" I was uncomfortable. "What is it?" My mother acknowledged that she isn't the true daughter of the man who was arrested. "What?" Shocked, I said. "What does that signify?" "I fell in love with your stepfather when I was frequenting nightclubs," she said. "However, I also maintained connections with other bartenders, one of whom worked as a researcher at the university during the day and bartended at night to supplement his income, shown to be the biological father of Sydney. I was taken aback. I responded, "That's incredible." "Sydney always struck me as having a unique quality. Neither of you seemed like her. She is perceptive and smart. However, I never thought this would happen." "Yes, according to my mother, her biological father is attractive and intelligent. That's why Sydney is so adorable. Is he aware of this?" I inquired. My mother acknowledged that he is aware. The complex web of secrets and falsehoods upon which my family was based astounded me. Each new revelation was much more startling. My mother dismissed the deception when I challenged her about it, stating that you must also be concealing something. "Whoa," Jake responded. "That's a big problem." My stepfather had begun to notice that Sydney didn't look like him, it turned out. He hired a detective because he was suspicious and found out the truth just before he was arrested. When my mother told me this, she laughed. "Funny." Startled, I asked, "Is there anything funny about this?" For fraud, a stepfather was detained. A woman who lied about her daughter's paternity and had extramarital relationships. It's not real. This is our family's reality. It dawned on me then that I still didn't know why she had visited me. "Why are you here now then?" I inquired. "Well, I nearly forgot," my mother said nonchalantly. "Did I not say before that he is now free on bail?" Still skeptical, I answered, "Yes, I remember. We're having financial difficulties, and the bail was far greater than anticipated. I thus came to beg for a loan from you." I was totally taken aback. I was concerned about her since I thought she could be really sick. However, she came for this reason. I kept thinking how stupid it was of me to feel sorry for her. She had always been just this type of person. It was not remorse or sickness that made her stop wearing expensive clothes or eating nice meals. She was broke as a result of her husband's frauds. She didn't intend to divorce him in spite of everything. I could feel my rage building. "Hold on a minute," I stated angrily after being kicked out of the house and having my life made terrible. "You're now requesting money from me. How can you say that at all?" "But didn't I apologize?" As if that resolved the matter, she answered, "Victoria and I are family, and families need to support one another during difficult times." "Family?" I lost my temper. "When did you ever treat me like a mother?" "Calm down," she murmured, disregarding my annoyance. "How much do you make, by the way? Show me your bank account." The final straw was that. My rage erupted. Years after she had thrown me out, the same woman was again blatantly requesting my financial assistance. It was me who threw her out this time. I shoved her out the door with her stuff, even though Jake tried to intervene. I was furious. After that, I hardly recall anything. Still in shock from that terrifying experience, a week later, another letter from my father sealing uncomfortably was in the mailbox when I checked it. With Jake at my side, I opened it. "What is it saying?" Jake inquired. "Is your father going to show there because he likes your mother?" "No, it isn't it." My eyes widened as I read. I remarked. My dad had finally realized his ambition of becoming a cartoonist, according to the letter, which seemed unbelievable. His work had been successful when he made his debut. Furthermore, his animation was being turned into a live-action film and a television series. "Congratulations, Dad," I muttered, overflowing with joy and pride. It was unbelievable to me that such amazing things were taking place. It didn't seem genuine. My dad's efforts had finally paid off after years of arduous work, and the outcomes were astounding. I quickly replied to his letter to let him know how excited I was and to ask if we could meet in person, because I wanted to tell him personally how proud and delighted I was. I received his response shortly after, and he said, "Let's meet next week." He also agreed to meet. "I could not be more excited to see you. I have a lot to say. We wouldn't have seen each other in 16 years. Is it acceptable if I accompany you?" Jake inquired. "Of course," I said. "It will bring him great joy to meet you." "When?" At last the day arrived. My dad's flat was our destination. I was reaching for the doorbell. From within, I could hear a mother and children's voices. I hesitated, a bit perplexed. My dad was there when the door opened. "Victoria." "What a long time it has been. You've developed into a lovely young lady, and this had to be Jake, your fiancé." "You made a wise choice," he replied kindly. "Dad, it's been a long time." Grinning, I said, "What are the voices I heard within, though?" After a brief pause, he replied, "I apologize for not telling you sooner. I have, in fact, remarried." Even though I suspected this, I was nonetheless taken aback to have it verified. We made the decision to take our time catching up in a local diner, the same one I had been to previously. This time, we took our time eating and conversing. It seemed as if I had traveled back in time to see my dad after all these years. Our chat was made even more memorable by its warmth and sense of nostalgia. "Congratulations on your first cartooning gig, Dad." With pride, I said. "Additionally, there are the cartoon and film versions. That is an amazing accomplishment." "Thank you." His expression brightened as he said, "I was saved by it. If things didn't work out this time, I was prepared to give up. I even left my work to concentrate on this issue." "What?" "If things didn't work out, how would you have responded?" Startled, I asked, "Was your wife on board with that?" He chuckled uneasily. "In the end, everything worked out, although it caused some stressful times at home." He clarified that his hesitation to get in touch previously stemmed from his uncertainty about the future of his cartooning profession. He desired to hold off until he was more secure and assured of his accomplishments. He remarked, "I was at a low point that day when I saw you watching me. Due to the financial strain, my wife had temporarily departed with the children. I was in pieces. However, you survived." I said, "Yes," he answered with a smile. I made the decision to move to a bigger apartment when my debut was confirmed, and I began receiving significant profits. My spouse and kids returned home after forgiving me. "You finally succeeded after everything you had to deal with," I said with a sense of pride and happiness. "I can now at last provide my family with the kind of life they deserve." He smiled contentedly as he said, I was struck by how far he had come after hearing this, conquering several obstacles to realize his ambition. It gave me hope for the future and was inspirational. My dad stated, regretting his actions, "I wasn't the best father before. However, this achievement can help me make up for some of my previous errors." I answered, "It's not about being perfect, Dad. You've always been adored by me. Mom was much to blame for your difficulties. Even though he had previously known my mom better than anybody, I chose to inform him about her startling history after hearing that. I told him, and he was surprised. He struggled to comprehend anything at all as he gazed at me in shock. Well, he paused and said, "I suppose I wasn't entirely mistaken about her." "What are you saying?" I inquired. He acknowledged that he had always questioned why he had married your mother. However, I believe I now know. I observed her personality defects when I first met her, and I felt I could exploit those to create my comic stories. I couldn't help but respect his integrity and love for his craft after hearing him say that. I remarked, "Dad, you've come so far." My dad then turned to face Jake and said, "I hope you'll continue to support us, even though I know I'm not a perfect father-in-law." Jake grinned broadly. "Don't stress over that. Many thanks and congrats on realizing your ambition. I wish you further success in the future, and am very thrilled for you. I believed I could finally move on from the past, and things appear to be going well. However, I saw something startling when I returned to my flat. The same woman I had previously kicked out, my mother, was standing outside with her unruly husband and a middle school-aged child. Stunned, I gazed at her. "Is that Sydney?" "All adults?" I questioned incredulously. "Victoria, why are you behaving this way?" My mother lost her temper. "It's unacceptable how you treat your mother. You are as disagreeable as ever." "Incredibly so," I whispered. "Why have you come here at all?" Her spouse added his voice. "Everyone, please be quiet. This area is open to the public. Come on in." I made an effort to remain composed after they were inside, but it was difficult. "You're here, but why?" I asked strongly. There was a pause before my mother spoke. "Some issues have arisen. There are allegations that my spouse and I are involved in fraud, but these are only hearsay. Nothing has been verified." "It's all a misunderstanding," her spouse hastily added. "At the nightclub, a little error turned into a major one." "So, are prosecutors now questioning you?" Sharply, I asked. "Yes, indeed," my mother acknowledged, "but it's not a big deal. It will pass, I'm sure." I gave a headshake. I'm worn out with the constant turmoil she introduced into my life. "Please, enough now. I'm hoping this won't get in the way of my wedding. You are not invited, just to be clear." Her spouse scowled. What sort of daughter would speak in such a manner to her mother? Her biological kid is you. Naturally, you want to lend a hand a bit. To employ a lawyer, we need money. Yes, exactly. Leaping in, my mother remarked. "My daughter is you. This implies that you have an obligation to assist me." "You are also my biological sister," Sydney smugly added. As like it would change anything. What I was hearing was unbelievable. It was brutally obvious what they really wanted. Their sole concern was obtaining money from me. Their futures are no longer important to me. "I know it's difficult to say, but don't you feel that I'm asking too much?" I spoke aggressively. "What? What an outsider like you thinks is irrelevant." The spouse of my mom yelled at Jake. "You are only an ordinary worker. Why do you believe you have the right to speak? You are one of the most obnoxious people." I was incensed when I heard this. However, things took a surprising turn before I could react. "Pardon me for interrupting," Jake answered coolly. "However, I share Victoria's father's lofty goals. Despite the fact that I'm approaching 41, my goal is to become a prosecutor after passing the bar test." My father sneered. "It's an admirable dream. However, I don't think someone like you can pull it off. It was more than I could handle." Jake gently took hold of my hand and stopped me just before I was about to toss the glass of water I was carrying at them. "My father is a prosecutor in the prosecutor's office. Therefore, I want to be one too," Jake added with assurance. There was silence in the room. Their arrogant demeanors immediately changed. "Hold on, is that accurate?" my mother inquired, obviously taken aback. Would you please ask your father to assist us, Jake? I'm not involved in any fraud, and my husband is not a horrible guy. Sydney even added her voice. I take it you're my brother-in-law? Please pay attention to our request. I was done listening. I firmly decided it was time to expel them without saying anything more. They were no longer a part of my life. A few days later, I went to a celebration of my father's new book release that was thrown by a publishing business. It seemed quite different from the life I had left behind to be there with my father, his new wife, and their kids. How is your mom doing right now? I was asked by someone at the party. We have severed our connection. I just stated that I no longer care about my family. They said, that's a strong decision. I can't blame you, though. A cartoon my father drew about my mother served as the inspiration for his book. Everyone avoided the domineering woman in the narrative because of her peculiar conduct. He was successful because a publisher had taken notice of the novel concept. In fact, I informed them that she had lately gotten in touch with me, saying the book was based on her and demanding payment. They shook their heads and muttered, "Unbelievable. She hasn't changed at all." "No," I said. It was wise to break up relations. I later learned that my stepfather had been found guilty of fraud schemes and given a life sentence. My mother, on the other hand, began working as a hostess at a bar that was affiliated with the nightclub where her husband had been employed. She had never had a real job before. Sydney, on the other hand, worked hard for a brighter future while pursuing her education in the neighborhood. In my case, Jake and I grew close to my father's new family. Eventually, we moved into the lovely apartment that my father had acquired, sharing a happy and peaceful life together. We're looking forward to the future, particularly the day Jake fulfills his ambition of becoming a prosecutor.